apply robotics in the internal audit and SOX world. Next month, we're going to do ASC 842, the leasing standard, and how it applies to private companies. We did one for public companies earlier this year. And then in November, for public companies, optimizing SOX, so how to get your SOX program more efficient. And then in December, IT security and cloud with Tim Foss, our IT security cloud expert. Okay? So bear with me for a second, and I'm going to switch presentations here, and then we can go around and give introductions. Okay, so again, my name is Jim Hannon. I'm a National Practice Director with IFG. I have been in the accounting and finance profession for about 28 years. So, yes, long time, over 28 years. And in my career, I've done everything, worked in the Big Four auditing, worked for regional firms as a managing director in the risk practice, and I was a corporate controller for a multinational company for a number of years. So I think I've done pretty much every type of thing you can do with the accounting and finance role all over again. So I'm joined here by my colleague, Chris Denver.
Hi, good morning. My name is Chris Denver. I've been with IFG for about a year and a half, but I've been consulting in the accounting and finance internal audit space and technology space for almost 20 years. I'm really thrilled to have Dan Deaver join us. He's with Eon Climate Renewables. Eon has been my client since before they were Eon. So they used to be a company called Airtricity. And I've been working with them since their Airtricity days, which has been almost 15 years. So we've got a great long-standing relationship with Eon, and I'm glad to add a kind of another notch in the belt here with bringing Dan out to kind of speak on things. So Dan, introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Dan Deaver. I've been working with Eon for about 3 years now, but the last year I've been switched roles from financial reporting to RPA developer. So I'm really excited to kind of share some of Eon's tips and tricks, and then walk you through one of the automations that we've done.
Okay, so what we're going to cover today is, first we're going to talk about what is RPA, so everybody understands. Maybe you guys already know what it is, but we're going to talk about what it is and how it's used, and then using RPA in your organization, so we'll get into kind of the nuts and bolts of how you would apply it, and then we'll get into selecting processes to automate, because that's one of the key things you have to figure out, what processes am I going to use it for. We'll get into some nuts and bolts here, so actually building and implementing the bots, what's involved in that, the maintenance and upkeep, and we're going to go through some use cases, including an example. We're going to walk through an actual bot that Dan's going to walk us through that he has built that can show you a lot of different kind of things that RPA can do. We've got screenshots and some videos, that kind of thing. So I think it's going to give you a good idea of how RPA can be applied. And so we designed this roundtable as really a very practical way to get an understanding of RPA and how you could use it in your organization. It's not going to be high-level theoretical. It's going to be actual nuts and bolts, how you actually use RPA and get it going in your organization. Because we see a lot of other presentations that are very kind of theoretical, and this we want to actually get down to the brass tacks and what you actually do here. So first of all, what is RPA and how is it used? So RPA is defined as a programmable software that performs rule-based processes by interacting in applications the same way as humans do. So it's also sometimes called a digital worker. The RPA acts like a person. It sits on a laptop or some other similar device. It's got its own credentials, and it goes and it does things that people do, okay? So RPA works with rules-based processes. Rules-based is it goes through a specific sequence of steps to get to a result, okay? And it works with applications in a non-invasive manner. So what that means is it can operate and use applications using what's called an application programming interface, or an API, which is similar to humans use, we use the graphical interface, GUIs nowadays, no more green screens, right? But the RPA uses the APIs, for those of you who aren't familiar with them.
Does everyone know what RPA stands for? Robot.
Yeah, robotics process automation, yes. Sorry, I kind of jumped ahead.
Yeah.
So, what is it used for? So RPA is used to automate manual processes. And here's a bunch of different examples. So you can go to a website, get information, put in a spreadsheet. You can create or post journal entries, enter data. You can open emails, take stuff out of the emails, and enter the application. You can create format, run reports, IT programs, perform logical operations as well. So the RPA can perform these actions together. So I just wanted to make it kind of powerful, so you can set up the RPA to do a bunch of different things, which is one of our examples to show you, together, not just one thing, and tie them together to achieve an overall result. So it's a very powerful tool. And RPA is best typically used for high volume, rules-based processes in which multiple applications or databases, because RPA can move data easily between applications or databases. Processes which are stable, repeatable, and consistent, and where the data is structured. Think about the RPA as a robot, okay? And if you ever play the game Robot with your kids, and the kids, you say, okay, now I'm a robot, tell me what to do. Dad, take a step forward. The kid can't say, oh, Dad, go get a glass of water. No, you have to do all the steps involved to get the glass of water. That's what the bots do. Okay.
So it's kind of talking about, well, what does a digital workforce look like? And I was just talking about this a little bit earlier in some of the networking ahead of time. Is one article that I read is kind of interesting. It says that organizations of the future that are fully automation optimized may get rid of or change the Chief Human Resources Officer role. So the CHRO role will become the Chief Resources Officer, and eliminating the human piece of it, because the CRO of the future will have both humans and bots reporting to the same person in the company, with the idea being that person will facilitate human and bot interaction, right? So I'm sure everybody here has seen some of the scary headlines in LinkedIn and all that about, oh my God, 80% of accountants are going to lose their jobs with the RPA thing. I don't think that's actually anywhere near what's going to happen, because if you think about it, this is just another evolution of tools that are available to accountants or to business professionals to use, like the 10 key was. So in the old days, some of us could remember, you'd have to sit there with 14 column or 7 column green paper with a pencil, and you'd sit there and you manually add up numbers, and then, spreadsheets come along, and that's great. Anybody lose their job to spreadsheets? Not really. Is anybody going to lose their job to RPA? Probably a few people, but they're most likely going to be recast into higher and better use type of roles. So today, you do some work, and then you think about what you're doing, and then you analyze what you did, and then you just go have coffee. Right? So, but this is the way a human thinks, or a human behaves in many cases, is you do the work first, and then you think about it, and then you plan it at the end, and then you're like, well, heck, no, I'll just go get a coffee. Right? In the digital workforce of the future modern enterprise, the RPA will do all the work. And then you can apply some cognitive to the RPA and some smart analytics to it, and then you get a fully digitalized and optimized workforce, okay, where your personnel, the gray matter, the people like us, we're actually engaging in higher and better use activities. So what does all that mean, and how does it sit sort of on the spectrum of AI and all these other things? There's a lot of buzzwords floating around. So this is a scale from things that just do basic robots to full artificial intelligence, right? So Terminator on that side, and your toaster on this side, and everything in between. And we'll talk a little bit. I think mainly what we're going to be talking about today with Dan is the attended, the unattended type of RPA structure. But I tried to kind of lay out some similar characteristics where office automation, and this is like a spreadsheet macro in Excel, right? So nothing very sexy there. Attended and unattended, this is going to be some of the RPA bots that Dan's going to talk about. Virtual assistants are the things like when you go on to, American Airlines or something like that, and then the little chat box pops up, and you know it's a bot, right? But it has a full scale of interactions that it can do with you, but you can break it. It's not smart if you don't use exactly what it's looking for. It'll say, well, let me refer you to a customer service rep. Or without you even knowing it, it'll transfer you to a customer service rep, who then starts typing back to you and can think about it. But artificial intelligence is the full deal, where it works with completely unstructured data and can do a lot of the tasks that a person can do in terms of thinking about things and the cognitive abilities, okay? And we'll make all these slides available to you at the end, so like we're almost done. All right.
So a question would be, why implement RPA? Why do it, okay? First of all, RPA is a lot less expensive and faster to implement than this typical system adoptions or automation, where you have to go and do some kind of enhancements to your system or programming or a new system or that kind of thing. RPA can be deployed pretty quickly. It takes what, a couple weeks to build a bot, right?
Yeah, depending on the scale of what you're trying to implement, I mean, you'll realize you have some really quick wins right when you get started.
Mm-hmm. And it can reduce cost, right, by automating your manual process. So you're doing something, people are doing something manually. If the bot can do that, okay, now you're not paying people to do that, and then people can be redeployed. And we found that it relieves a lot of pain points on the cumbersome, time-consuming manual tasks that drive people crazy, okay? That they can reduce errors and improve control because they run 24/7 and they don't make mistakes. Of course, if they're programmed correctly. If you're programmed to do it wrong, it's going to continue to do it wrong all the time. Many companies, actually pretty much all companies, have manual processes, but most companies have some kind of legacy system for which the cost to automate it is too high. So that's where the bots come in. They can help that. Years ago, there was a major trend of offshoring work, like with a lot of the back office operations going to shared service centers and low-cost geographies. But with RPA, now you've got another option. Instead of offshoring the work, now you can have the bots doing a lot of that repetitive manual work that was being done in the offshore location. A key point too is, as I've mentioned with relieving the pain points, of automation of manual tasks enables the talent to focus on higher value work. And there's a couple other things that can make it more auditable and give you better data to analyze your processes.
One thing to keep in mind is that bots are not like the panacea, right? So if you have a crummy process and you automate it, you'll get faster crummy process, right? So you, first of all, the first step, and a lot of organizations don't necessarily do this, or I've talked to a couple people who implemented bots, like, yeah, we did one or two, and then we just kind of stopped. And I was like, well, why? And it's like, well, we weren't quite getting the results that we wanted, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, tell me about your process. I'm like, no, I want to tell you about my bot. I'm like, no, tell me about your process, because I know what your bot can do. It's pretty plain vanilla, not plain vanilla, but it's pretty standard. So what's your process look like? And that turns out to be where the flaws lie, is that there's too many weird manual overrides and decision points. Bots can only do the same thing every single time, but if you can clarify your process, then you can really drive some savings out of the bots. Another thing to think about too is if your organization is one of those where, hey, we acquired a couple companies over the years, and this one's on SAP, and this guy's on Oracle, and we got JD Edwards over here, and we're still running QuickBooks in this subsidiary. And boy, our IT group is wrestling with how do we convert all this data into one standard platform. Well, guess what? You don't necessarily have to do that. A bot can sit on top of all those systems and reach into all of them and render consolidation for you in seconds, right? If you program it to do the right thing. So there can be some tremendous time savings and really interesting workarounds to massive system implementations with relatively cheap RPA. So just some things to keep in consideration.
And we're going to talk a little bit about that thought process, about how you figure out what to automate, because that's pretty important. And that's one of the things between being successful or not successful implementation. So Chris kind of talked about this already, but what is IA and how does it relate to RPA? So artificial intelligence is much more advanced. It kind of mimics the human ability to look at something, to hear something, and detect patterns, and then use unstructured data, and it can change its behavior by learning over time. So RPA in advanced deployments is integrated with AI. So the first step may be, okay, you deploy RPA to get some low-hanging fruit, automate some things. Okay, now you take care of low-hanging fruit. Now you're gonna go to more unstructured data, unstructured processes. You start to employ AI to do that. An example would be a company that we know about that had a shared service center, and they had to process vendor invoice. They have thousands of vendor invoices. They have an army of people that do this. The bot can't read the vendor invoices, so they got a OCR, scanning technology scans the invoices, and then there's a technology that converts the scanned invoices into machine readable format, and then is able to determine what the key fields are in that. Okay, here's the vendor number, here's the PO number, here's the amount. Then it passes that to the bot, and then the bot goes through and posts it to the payable system. Okay, so that's an example of a very advanced deployment. So what are some of the limitations of RPA? So it works for structured, standardized processes. You have to have a rule-based, structured, standard process. It's a robot. It does this, and it does this, and it does this, and it does that. It's not intelligent. It can't, if there's an exception, it doesn't know what to do with it, okay? It needs at least semi-structured data. And one of the key points too is that RPA is brittle. So if anything changes, it doesn't know what to do. So Dan, you've seen this happen at Eon, right? What's an example of that?
So, yeah, I'll give you a detail, but I would reiterate, you have to you really have to plan for everything that could possibly go wrong with a robot. So, I guess an example would be if we have one where it'll actually log into a bank it'll log into a bank portal and pull down bank statements every month. But if there's any change to the user interface, so the navigation menus change or the drop downs change, the bot's going to get lost. And so you have to constantly monitor and maintain them if there's any change to the environment in which it works in. I see commonly what happens if the data format changes, like the columns are rearranged. The bot's not going to be able to adapt to any changes like that. And so it is really important to have sort of backup plans for what can go wrong, so that the bot will know what to do in those situations and who to communicate the error to.
Okay, so now we're going to get into some nuts and bolts about how you're going to use RPA, right? So we've decided, to go down the path, but some of the questions that we want to ask, and these are the topics we're going to cover in more detail in our upcoming roundtable in key decisions in September, okay? But first of all, think about how does RPA fit into your overall automation and IT strategy? RPA is one of the tools that are available to help you automate processes. When we're helping companies with automation, the first thing we do is we're looking at a process. Well, first we're looking at the process first, okay? And then we say, here's a process problem. Is there a solution that exists within the current system? Because the system is not being effectively utilized. More often than not, systems are not being fully utilized because people don't understand the capabilities of the systems they already have. So that's the first thing we look for. If there's nothing in the system to work, then is there a tool out there that is designed specifically for this application? One example, we did a project some years back with a company which is a large retailer, and they were manually reconciling all the credit card receipts. You can imagine there's huge volume with all these credit card receipts. And it took a lot of time. In fact, they had people, that's all they did all day long was reconcile credit card receipts. And their system couldn't do it, but there is a tool out there. There are a number of tools that are designed specifically for reconciling credit card receipts to your bank, okay? So is there a tool out there? And if not, then you look at what RPA is. So RPA should be part of your thought process about automation. Don't go to RPA first, okay? And then you gotta think about how does it fit in your org structure and who owns it, okay? If you're gonna have shared service centers or a center of excellence, a lot of companies have set up a center of excellence to kind of run the RPA. And then who owns it? Is it finance? It often starts in finance, right? Because finance is the kind of ahead of it. They're thinking we have to have more automation because we have all these manual processes and workarounds. Or does it need to go in IT like any other application?
Finance is a very easy entry point for most organizations because there are a lot of finance people are process people. So there's a lot of very automatable processes that already exist in finance. But then you turn to find out, and Dan can probably be talking about this a little more, is that you can roll it out into your operations areas too, where it makes sense. The question is, where do you put it? You know, I talked earlier about having a chief resources officer. Another thing to think about is you're thinking down this path, because there's a lot of this that needs to get figured out sort of culturally, but Microsoft just bought one of the big RPA players. So I've been teasing Jim a little bit and saying it'll be 2 or 3 years, but the next update to Windows will have Word, Excel, Microsoft RPA, and everybody will have it on their desktop, right? And that's the future, is it's just gonna be there, and so use it or don't, but then it's like, does IT really own that at that point? So, things to think about.
You know, there's a lot of tools out there right now. If Microsoft's going to be running, that'll be interesting. You know, selecting the right tool. According to Gartner, there are 3 right now in the what they call the Magic Quadrant, which is the UiPath, Blue Prism, which is the one that Eon is using currently, and Automation Anywhere. Those are the 3 top providers currently. But there's a host of other solutions that are out there. Okay. Very important is how is security managed, because the bots have their own credentials, so they can log into systems, and so how are you managing that security? That was a big roadblock at United. We were talking to the folks here at United who are implementing, and they haven't gotten very far yet because security is such a big issue, they can't figure out how to manage the security aspect of it, okay? And then you've got different approaches to implement it. You want to go with a pilot, start with one area and pilot and see how it works. You want to start small and scale up. You want to just do a big bang. I know there are companies that we've talked to who have done big bang. They've said, we're going to build 100 automations in this year, okay? So they've invested a major amount of money into it. Change management, fears of job loss. So once you start rolling out RPA, if you're not careful, people may be resistant because they think, oh, you're just trying to replace me with these digital workers. But I guess at Eon, there's actually pretty good acceptance of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were really careful about demonstrating the value before we sort of went live with them, and really sort of laying the foundation that this isn't a cost, this isn't like a headcount reduction. This is going to allow you to spend time on more value-add activities. So yeah, I mean, to your point, it is really important to assure people, especially in those positions where they may be, a lot of their processes may be good candidates for RPA, that we're not here to cut headcount. We're trying to help. So.
And actually, the opposite's happening because now people are thinking about it as, oh, geez, this can solve a lot of my pain points, and that's why it's become. Now everybody's got a whole hey, can you do this? Can you do this? Right?
Yeah, we have that problem now. We've gotten a couple of the process owners have been like, oh, this one worked really well. Can you do this, this, and this? And we're like, we don't have enough hands to do it.
And then some other things to think about, and you want to develop in-house, so Dan is an in-house development. A lot of companies have outsourced that. And then who's your implementation partner who helps you go through this RPA journey, okay? So we're going to cover this stuff, like I said, at our September 18 event, which is in our Roseman office. Okay, now, we've gone down the path of RPA. We're sure we're going to use it. Now we got to figure out where we're going to use it, okay? And some certain kind of processes lend themselves to RPA, and so the first screen that we want to think about is can the process can it be automated with RPA? So as I mentioned, you want stable processes. If they're undergoing major changes, it doesn't make a lot of sense to build a lot of bots because they're going to change anyway. Is it standard, consistent, and repeatable? It's a robot. It's got to do this and then do that, right? Does it use structured data? Does it include activities like searching, updating, manipulating, and reporting information, or moving it between different systems? Is it a high volume process? High volume processes lend themselves to automation, obviously, because there's a lot of opportunity there. Is it prone to error? If it's documented, that helps. And does it interact with Windows or web-based applications? Because these tools are kind of pre-built, configured, mapped to work with all these applications out of the box. So it makes it easier.
So weird things to consider, right? So I have a hospital client that's tons and tons and tons of manual processes that are ripe for automation. So RPA is a great solution for them, except they're going from old SAP ECC unsupported to SAP S/4HANA right now. And what's interesting is the general ledger account code for ECC 6.0 is 6 digits, in S/4HANA it's 8. Well, that's a big problem, right? Cost centers are 5 and they're going to 9 digits. So they've kind of come up with some ideas around, well, okay, we just add a 0 to all the account numbers, so that's easy for the GL, so the RPA could probably handle that. But the cost centers are goofy, so there's no real rhyme or reason to how they're mapping into the new cost center. So putting an RPA structure in now in this old environment that's changing so dramatically makes no sense at all. Because the bot's not going to be smart enough to figure that out.
And one of the things we'll talk about, and Dan's going to get into too, is there are what are they called in environmental variables? Yeah. So you can set the bot up to refer to a table that you can maintain separately. Maybe it's a table of approvers or a table of people involved in the process. And so as things change, you can update those variables instead of having to revise the program. So factors to apply in determining which processes to automate. So what I hear all the time companies talk about, first of all, is ROI. What's the return on investment? And so they want to calculate the return on investment and then prioritize projects by, you guys prioritize based on return on investment. That's one of the key criteria, right? And so how do you calculate return on investment? Well, you have to, if it's an internal process, you're trying to figure out how much time we're spending on this process and what's the cost of that. So, because then we're going to have to compare that to the cost of building the bot and say, is it worth it, right? And so maybe you prioritize, say, okay, we're going to just list all the projects out, and one of the things we're going to do is prioritize based on the ROI. We're going to start with the highest ROI projects and work our way down. Important is think about other things such as revenue enhancement. So maybe you could, with a bot, you can capitalize on revenue opportunities. I mean, we're talking about it in terms of like marketing and how we communicate with all our clients and others, and trying to automate that. And then other savings that are very important to think about is maybe you can reduce some compliance outside costs, fines or penalties, or reduce upstream bottlenecks. And you've got a good example of something like that, right?
Yeah, so we actually, I didn't actually develop this one, but we have a bot that currently goes through all of our open purchase orders in SAP, and it identifies anyone which is going to be qualifies for tax exempt certificates. So then what it'll do is it'll go through, extract all of the vendor detail, and then actually go populate the tax form for whichever state it's in, and then send it to our tax manager who will review it. And currently our tax team is sort of limited, so they didn't have enough time to keep up. They would do it if it was a significant purchase, but for some of the smaller ones, we're actually seeing like additional revenue come back just because they're able to keep up with all these tax exempt certificates. So.
I'm an auditor, so I'm gonna ask an auditor question. How do you know about the completeness of that robot to make sure that it does catch all of it?
That's it. I actually can't answer that. I'm not entirely sure the completeness check in that.
Well, actually, you do a complete test because we kind of gloss over this a little bit. So one of the things that the bot we're going to show you is pulling all the open POs, and it does. You do a check. So you're comparing what's in your query to what's in the SAP.
Yeah, for that particular example with the tax exempt, I'm not sure. I'm sure they have some sort of controls on the back end. The one that I'm going to demonstrate, we do have control checks, so it'll actually sum up every single purchase order and then provide like a statistic to the end user. So it just lets them know that yes, I went through the entire population and this is like what I analyzed.
It's kind of like what you do if, like with an EDI too, right? At the end of the EDI, there's a check to make sure the totals match, right? So you do the same kind of thing. This thing here, that's one way to do it anyway. But the bot can easily do that math. So some other things to think about from an impact standpoint is risk reduction and strategic importance. There may be other things you want to consider. And then the qualitative factors, as I mentioned in the previous slide, you've got all these criteria for what can make a process automatable. And so what companies often do is to just fill up a scorecard. So they score the processes, those criteria. So, okay, these processes that are in this high score are candidates for RPA. A couple other thoughts about this. The best results come from a strategic, comprehensive, data-driven approach. Strategic in that it's aligned with your overall business transformation and automation strategy. So what are you trying to accomplish in terms of your business processes and your use of automation? It's comprehensive, it takes a broad view of the organization. And how do you do that? Well, a lot of companies have actually gone through the process of just doing the process mapping. Something you would do if in an audit where you're trying to say how much we're gonna audit, do a risk assessment, you have to have a process map, kind of what's your universe of processes that you can work with. And then developing the data, which is process measurement, which is something we do in all our business transformation projects, is we try and get data about how much time is being spent on a process so we can use that data to prioritize our efforts. A lot of times we find that people are spending a lot of time on things they didn't realize they were spending time on. When we add it all up, and stuff they thought was a big issue is not, they're not spending as much time as we thought, okay? And then also thinking about processes that could be good candidates for RPA, but they need to be standardized first. So there could be just a lot of process work to get things standardized so that you could then begin to automate. So here's an example. So you've got the organizational impact, which is time saved, risk reduction. These are different criteria. Or feasibility, does it fit the criteria? How long will it take to implement? What other things are involved in getting it in place? And then so, if the organizational impact is along this axis and the feasibility in this axis, projects in the upper right-hand corner would be ideal candidates for RPA. So a word about best practices, I'm kind of hammering this a little bit, is that aligning your RPA strategy with your overall transformation and automation strategy is one back in a little bit is having an RPA plan. Don't just launch into it and start applying it, but having a plan, thinking about it, and thinking ahead, and looking at with other plans you have, getting integration with some support from IT. Why is that important?
So it's very important because what we didn't realize was we kind of did RPA and IT knew that we were doing it, but we didn't realize that we needed to coordinate with them every single step of the way because the bot is essentially set up as an end user. So on our network, it has its own credentials, it has its own Windows password. So we had to make sure that bot had access to all of the applications that we wanted it to work with. We needed to make sure that it had access to all the various network folders. What else did we? Yeah, I mean, those are the big ones. Pretty much just making sure that IT is aware of what you're doing so that when you develop it on your local computer and then move it into production, you already have all of those requirements set up.
And the other reason is because if the bot is interacting with the application and IT makes an update to the application, now it could break the bot, right? So that the IT has to know what the bot is looking at. So if they change a menu or anything gets changed, it's going to break the bot, okay?
Scarier thing I know what you're going to say.
What?
You're probably going to say, well, what if somebody hacks your bot?
I do know that.
So that's what terrifies me as an auditor, right? So I'm like, holy cow, if you're giving the bot access to basically all of our financial statements and all of our systems and blah, 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 and somebody hacks the bot, what's gonna happen? Well, yeah, it's that everything you imagine that could be bad is gonna happen in that scenario. So getting the IT security people involved at step one is absolutely critical, as Dan has attested to, right? So you gotta make sure that thing is locked down and protected. And Dan, I think in your comments, you're gonna talk about how you've actually physically, operationally structured these things, so I don't want to steal your thunder.
Yeah, we will talk about it.
Yep, awesome. So just hang on to that thought, but we have an answer for it.
And yeah, so just one thing about that security question though is that the bot is set up, and because it's got its own, its own access to certain applications, whatever. Just like any other user, it has certain permissions, right? So it can go into SAP, but it can't do anything in SAP. It can go into SAP and do this, okay? So that's what you have to be careful about.
So be really careful about how narrowly you define what the bot can do, but also keep in mind that the bot has no morals, right? So I can go and say, hey Lee, I'll give you $100 if you give me all future financial information about your company. Just like, no way, that's against my code of ethics. Well, the bot has no code of ethics. It'll just do what it's told to do. So So if I'm able to hack it and it can allow me to do and access these things, we got a big problem.
So you gotta make sure if you have a Dan in your company that he's honest.
Let's pull up Dan's background.
Look at his criminal record, oh my God. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, I wanna, keep moving here, is learning to use the application, because, one question may be, you know, how do you get to use this, okay? So, the way the application works, and we're gonna show you this, is it's got built-in functionality. You don't need to have coding skills to build bots, although it is helpful, because you had some coding background even though. So what did you, Alex, let you talk about what the training and stuff was about?
Sure. So I essentially I started off with just an RPA boot camp. So it was an online class where I did the foundational Blue Prism course, and basically that's just starting from scratch. You just go through basic exercises, learn how to write loops, and learn how to do decisions and things like that. For me, it was really beneficial because it also gave me access to sort of like a experienced developer. So if I ran into any problems with the exercises, I could send emails and get help right away. Also at my company, we're headquartered in Germany, and it's already really taken off in Germany. So I went over and spent 2 weeks with them and sort of learned all their best practices, and they shared, I mean, that's where I really sort of learned a lot, was because they shared all the templates with me and just sort of gave me, it sort of really just sparked my imagination of what it could do once I saw what they were doing, so.
And there's also forums and blogs that, you know, like when you have questions, that kind of thing, you can go and say, I've got the problem, everybody ran into this before, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into actually building and implementing these things. So, first of all, how does the tool work? So, in the case of Blue Prism, Eon has a license. The license operates in the 24/7 over the license period, which is a year, okay? You can build an unlimited number of bots with this license. So theoretically, you may only need one license.
For like development purposes.
Right.
Yeah.
The thing is, when you go to run them, you can only run one bot at a time. So if it turns out you need to run some bots at the same time for some reason, then you may need to go to multiple licenses. But in your case, you haven't run into that, at least in the US, right? You're able to schedule. So there's a scheduling process to work around that, okay? So this is the process.
So jump in real quick. We're gonna talk a lot about Blue Prism today because that's what Dan is using, so that's our operational example. But there are roughly, depending on how you count them, anywhere from 20 to 24, probably new ones popping up all the time, RPA companies. So we talked about Blue Prism, UiPath, and Automation Anywhere are the big three. There's a second tier of more, so UiPath, Automation Anywhere, and Blue Prism are very general in usage, so you can kind of use them for almost any kind of purpose. There's a second tier of bots, and we're not going to get into a whole lot of detail on this stuff today, but they're very specific. So Redwood is one that's specific for finance and accounting, particularly in banking and insurance industries. So there's some kind of tailored RPAs that are out there too. I want to make you aware that we are not promoting Blue Prism, or we're not paid licensee of Blue Prism or any of its affiliates. We're just using it as an example today, so I just want to make sure that everybody understands it.
Yeah, so I'm gonna let Dan talk about this, because this is the kind of standard development and implementation process, and this is what you follow at Eon, right?
So I actually was taught this when I went over to Germany, and so the first step is to basically meet with the current process owner and get a very detailed understanding of the process as it exists today. So that means you identify all of the tasks, all of the actions, all of the different decisions and what-if scenarios that you're going to need to implement in the bot. Then you also get an idea of what applications it's going to work with. So Blue Prism currently has the most common applications are already mapped right out of the box. So you don't have to do any coding or anything like that. You could access a business object called Microsoft Excel, and you just choose a drop down of different actions. So you go through and you identify all of the applications that you need to work with. If there are applications which need to be mapped, you'll spend some time making sure that Blue Prism can do all the actions that it needs to in that application. From there, you kind of, sorry, I skipped a step. Up at the very top, you make a skeleton of So this is gonna serve as sort of like the flow chart for where the bot's gonna go. So identify all the different sub-processes you need to code and sort of just come up with an overall flow of the bot. After that, you start actually, when I say coding, I mean actually like the nuts and bolts of putting in like the variables, all the actions, all the logic, and you do that on a unit level. So I start just going sub-process, and I'll show you what I mean when I say sub-process, but after you go through and do that, you do integration testing, so that will be making sure that the whole bot flows. So if you're passing variables to different sub-processes, they all flow together. And then at the very end, you basically try and break the bot. So you try to figure out every possible scenario in which it could fail, and then you build in exceptions and figure out how the bot's gonna handle and recover from those errors, or those problems.
Okay. So the tool has some built-in functionality, and then I'm gonna let you explain what some of these are.
Sure.
But this is a picture of, in Blue Prism, what's called the Process Studio. And so each of these are built-in functions, for example, decision that allows you to, make a decision, yes, no, if then kind of thing, right?
Yeah, so kind of what Jim was just saying, so there's a whole slew of different, these tools basically guide the bot. So when you see decision, think of it as like an if statement. When you see choice, think of it as like a nested if statement. So an if statement with multiple different outcomes from it. When you see a loop, think of it as like a for loop, and that would be like the coding term for it. When you see data item, that could be a variable. It could be a text. It could be a text variable. It could be a number. It could be like a Boolean, like a true false. And so yeah, these are already packaged for you, so you don't need to know any syntax or any coding. You really just have to understand what each one of these does, and that's what you learn in like the Blue Prism Foundation course. You just start with little mini exercises where it's like write a loop to loop 10 times, and then after 10 times throw an error, or it's basic logic. So.
Okay, so now this next slide, I'm gonna give you a picture of a main page of a bot, and I'll explain what this is here. Okay, so let me step back.
It's like a flow chart.
It does look like a flow chart. Okay,
That's
so
how easy this is.
this is the main page. So it starts here. This shape here means sub-process. So you see it says terminate application. So when the bot gets to that, it goes to the terminate application tab and starts running that process. And then when it's done with that, then it goes to get credentials, and it goes to the get credentials tab. And then it goes to populate queue and so on. And then it gets to here, that's an action get next item. Does it have the item? Yes, and then it goes to here. If not, it goes down this path. So it does look like a flow chart, but the thing is, these are actions that the bot is taking. Over here, these are this is data, so this is the SAP username, password, etc., and other data sets that the system is using to perform its operations.
And one thing to note here is there's a specific SAP username for each of the bots. So if you say, well, who put this entry in there, and you need to go back as an auditor and look at it, oh, okay, this was bot number 4.
It's got its own credentials, right?
We gotta go and figure that out, why to do that.
And you see, here's all the different, as you're building, those are the different tools you're gonna use. So this is actually the example of the bot we're gonna show you that we're gonna run, okay? A few more slides before we get there. After the automation development tested and documented is moving in production, the best practice is to assign a specific runtime resource to host each bot. But so what do you guys do at Eon for that?
So all of our runtime resource is just it's just a PC. I think the more advanced way to do this would have a virtual PC, but currently we don't. We have actual physical laptops that each bot is assigned to. And so what we do is we have a whole lab of those that sit in Germany, and so they do that because they like to know exactly when updates are going to be pushed through. Because you have to think about it as if the bot were a person. So the bot can't do its tasks when, let's say, the antivirus software is being pushed through, and so they don't want any unscheduled interruptions happening. I have the ability to log into that computer and view exactly what the bot's doing at any time, and I also will sometimes develop in that environment just to make sure that when I develop it on my local laptop and bring it over to the bot's laptop, that it everything works.
So when you're going into production, then you do what is called hyper monitoring. What is hyper monitoring?
Hyper monitoring is basically I just watch exactly what the robot's doing in real time, and that's just for the ease of debugging. So rather than wait for it to fail, when we first go live, every time we run it, I like to just sit and watch it so that if it fails, I know exactly where it failed. I don't have to go back and try and like recreate the error. I'll just know right away, oh, it couldn't open this application, and then it's easier to fix.
And the thing is, it knows when you're watching it. You know if it's good or bad. So now running the bots. So now we've developed our bots, we've got them in production and we're running them, okay?
If Santa runs bots, we've got problems.
So, remember I mentioned that at least in Blue Prism it's set up so the license, you have to run sequentially, so you have to schedule them, so it's got a scheduler to manage that process, okay? And then you need to monitor the operation of the bots because, again, something fails, you want to know, especially if it's something critical, right?
Yeah.
And so how have you've built the bots so that for each step, if it fails, it notifies you at that step. Now, why do you do it that way?
For pure ease of debugging. I like to know, like I'll use an example. My method is I send dynamic emails depending on where the bot failed. So if we're going back to the bank statement example, the purpose is for the bot to log in to an online bank portal, pull down bank statements and save them on the network. If the bot couldn't log into the bank, I'll send an error saying, hi, I tried to log in, but my credentials weren't valid. That way I know when I'm going to debug it that it's probably the password expired or something along those lines. But if I have it successfully log in, but it can't navigate the website, then I would know, or I would think that maybe the website's user interface changed and I might have to do some remapping. So, and that email also will go out to the process owner, so the accountants actually using the bank statement. So at least they know, hey, this month looks like the bot didn't work, I need to go log in manually and pull the bank statements. But there are different ways to do monitoring. Some people prefer you just have a shared Excel document saved out on your network, and the bot, after it's done, will say, here, list out give me the bank statement name that you pulled, and just create a list so then the accountant could just open that up and see the actual Blue Prism. If you give the process owner or the business owner access to Blue Prism, there's some functionality in there that you can use for monitoring, but we don't do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you build it into the operation of the bot to send a notice if something goes wrong.
Correct.
Okay, so maintenance and upkeep. So since the bots are used to operating a static process, as we talked about, any small change can break the bot, and I think we kind of talked about this already. Like if if the bank example, they changed the menu item runtime, right? Is that what happened?
Yeah, they pretty much just gave the website like a facelift, and they changed some of the drop-down menus, and so I just had to simply remap it to click on the right one, and then once it got there, everything else was the same.
Right?
So.
Okay. But just to keep in mind that they do require maintenance and upkeep. They're not high maintenance.
Yeah, yeah, I haven't run into that yet.
I want more attention.
Yeah.
So now we're going to get into our example here, okay? So the example we're going to give you, this bot was built to address a problem that came out of our business transformation work, and we were looking at their close process and where they were spending a lot of time, and one of the pain points was the AP accrual process. So they're having difficulty with AP accrual because of open PO. So they use POs to initiate a purchase, but if the PO isn't received, or it's received but there's no invoice, or it's an invoice and no receipt, or the receipt doesn't match the invoice, all these things create problems, okay? So they built a bot to identify outstanding open POs that need action and notify the right people of the action specifically they need to take. And so I just want to talk about high level what the steps are the bot goes through. This kind of set the table is what you're going to see here. So the bot goes in the ERP system, which is SAP, and runs a query into the procurement module, pulls all the open POs, and it checks the totals, okay, by the way. Then it loads that query into a spreadsheet, okay? It puts the spreadsheet on the network, and then also imports the data into the bot. Then on that spreadsheet, it applies a number of different Excel formulas. It summarizes the POs, so you have the total amount by PO, and then it filters them based on the amount and outstanding, and then it also goes and figures out what the issue is. Is this a problem where there's missing a PO, the PO doesn't match, or whatever, what's the problem with it, okay? Then it goes, for the problem POs, it goes back into SAP and takes a screenshot of the PO screen in SAP, and then it creates an email. So if Chris is the person who didn't receive, it's gonna send an email to Chris and say, Chris, you didn't receive this PO or these POs. Here's a screenshot of the PO, here's the data on the PO, and here's also some information on what you're supposed to do. And then it sends it off to Chris, okay? So we're gonna go through this bot in detail because it shows you the number of different things that it can do, and I think like in auditing, it could be very powerful too, because you could use it to do all your audit tests, right? Okay, so now we're gonna go into the video here. I didn't attach the video to my screen. You wanna operate the video? Okay, so you know how to use the okay.
Okay, so the first thing that you're going to see is it's going to log in and terminate all existing applications that are open. I do this just as a precaution because you have to think of it, the bot actually mimics an end user. So if you had 1 million Excel files open or 1 million Windows open, it would slow down your computer. It would limit your physical memory. So that's why I do that. Then I also have it go grab the credentials that it's going to need to log in. So you can see here, it actually went and grabbed the SAP username and then the SAP password. So then these are then stored as variables which are going to be used for the logon.
So the bot has there's a table that the bot accesses with the credentials. So it can pull information. So you can update that in the table.
And it is encrypted, all the passwords.
So maybe you're gonna get to this, but how does just creating that, there must be more to it than just creating that with boxes, right? You have to then write for it, you don't write a script, those boxes write those scripts?
Yeah, pretty much. So I wish I had it on this computer. We could go into more detail, but for this presentation, those boxes actually serve, you're not seeing it because all of the sub-processes are on these tabs up here, but each one of these has actions that it goes through.
Which Blue Prism created.
Which Blue Prism, yeah. The only time I'm actually doing any coding in this entire process is when I take screenshots. That's the only time I ever had to write like manual code.
Okay.
Everything else, I was just out of the box Blue Prism functionality.
So for example, if one of your actions is after open Excel, then Blue Prism has a drop-down menu of actions to perform in Excel. So you select those actions from the menu, and you put it in your bot, and now it knows to do that step, and then you do the next step, and so on.
Yeah, like taking Jim's example, open Excel, so Blue Prism has a business object which is mapped called Microsoft Excel. It has a drop-down of different actions which you would want to do in Excel. If you were doing the open Excel, it would say, okay, I need a variable called the file path. And so you would pass it the file path, being like your C drive or wherever it was, pass it that, and then it would just open Excel. It would open that file for you.
So when you do that C drive path, it's in those, like that purple box, like something there, it's telling you these are the file paths
Yeah,
to go.
exactly.
Okay, so you build it.
Yep.
So one other action that you mentioned was grabbing data from your ERP system. So did you have to write a query or just select something and Blue Prism?
Yeah, so I
Like
have
data.
SAP already mapped in this example. So essentially when I go and map an application, what I'm doing is I'm clicking on the inputs. So SAP has different inputs that you need to populate. So I'm clicking on the various inputs in SAP, and Blue Prism recognizes how the coding for that particular input. So I'm clicking on the username, and I'm passing it my variable. I'm passing it this variable right here. And then I'm clicking on password, and I'm passing a variable. So you'll see, actually, I think next is you're gonna see how quickly it just goes through and it has these input boxes, and I've already mapped each input box. So then it just pretty much just flows simultaneously.
So like a recorder, so it's recording
It's
stuff.
like a recorder.
It's like a script. Yep.
Sorry,
We took it, this is a video he took of the bot operating.
Mhm.
Yeah.
apologize if I'm taking you on a different track, but is it, can it be integrated with other databases like Oracle or SQL Server?
I can't speak exactly to those applications. I would say, in my experience, all of the major applications, it interacts very well with it. So, and same with websites. So if you're operating with a website, you're gonna be looking for HTML tags. Like, if a website is developed with best practices, the entire website is gonna be completely readable by the bot. So you're pretty much just highlighting what you want the bot to click on, and then it's actually generating the HTML tag. So that's when we say it's interacting with the API. That's exactly what it's doing. It's saying, I want to access this HTML tag, take me there, kind of thing.
Pretty much anything a human can do on a computer, the bot can do. So yes to Oracle. Blue Prism, although I mentioned earlier, it's a general use package, was designed specifically for the banking industry. So a lot of questions that people who work in banking say is, well, okay, yeah, but if you want to log into our bank account and pull information out of our bank account, we've got dual factor authentication, we've got the little fob plus password, and guess what? They've actually figured that out. So Blue Prism can actually handle the algorithm that runs the fob, right? The little, I forget what they call this,
It's what our client wants, Danny. Yeah.
yes. So our RSA, the RSA part of the thing. So anyway, anything a person can do, a bot can do, just fast.
You're saying it's figuring out that sequence?
Yeah, I think that's how they, I don't know exactly what the technology is that allows them to do it, but I think it knows the algorithm. Because you know, it changes all the time, right?
Right.
Like every 6 seconds.
So rather than actually like having a camera looking at what it's going to show, you're saying it's
Actually-
There's an app that it's, because one of my clients actually produces this technology, so they have the physical fobs, but they also have a mobile version of that, so that it would access, or an application version, so it would access that through some kind of a secure path and get that data.
That you can't steal the RSA algorithm, right? As they've locked it down somehow. I'm not sure exactly what all the technology is to do that, but rest assured, you can still log into a dual factor authenticated.
Right, so this is kind of run a little more here.
Okay, so we grabbed our credentials and terminated all of our passwords. So then the next thing we're gonna do is import our mapping tables. This is pretty uneventful. I have these saved out on the network. It's essentially opening up Excel and then downloading mapping tables, which the bot is gonna use for running, how am I saying this wrong? The bot's gonna use these mapping tables for who to send the emails to. So each site has a site supervisor, an AP person assigned to it. So this is basically telling the bot who to send the email to. So now we're gonna see the bot log into SAP and pull the actual data. So
Okay, so you haven't, this is all happening by the bot by itself, none of this has been manually executed by you.
yeah.
How do you think through what to include? Like, I can wrap my head around the login, like I need to go username and then password, but then once I get from there, like if you were gonna run this report, how would I, as someone creating this, think through what to put in?
so I might be able to explain it this way. So like, I mapped, so each one of these boxes here is a variable which I've mapped. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, I want you to run this account, and I've generated that variable in Blue Prism.
Okay.
And all I've done is mapped it I've went through and mapped it in SAP. So, and then I've also mapped, you can't see it, there's an execute button over here, there's a variable down here, which I've mapped. So I'm not paying attention to all this other stuff.
Yeah.
All I'm doing is the key fields which I need to populate in order to run this transaction.
But how does the bot know, like, how are you mapping something from SAP, cause it, like, it says account?
Mhm.
How do you write it in Blue Prism to know that it's gonna go to that T code or that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so this has a unique, I don't know what word I want to use.
Transaction ID or something?
Yeah, it has a
That's the
unique
word.
ID which Blue Prism recognizes.
So would I have to know all of
No.
those IDs?
No. And that's I think the beauty of the software is that you don't need to know all of that stuff. All you need to know is when you map something, you're literally going in and clicking where you want what fields you want to populate. So you don't actually have to know the unique ID of each one of these inputs.
And then I'm assuming in your company you have like a catalog of different options of what I want to do and all the different bots that you have built. So if you want to do a PO checking, I'm assuming there is a catalog that they already have selected to going through the different T codes. That's what I'm thinking, that's how this is working, and the only thing you have to do as a front end, and I'm just talking about my added experiences, just do the flow chart and the mapping to figure out what processes you have to link to this specific bot. I'm assuming, but you're the expert.
I think what you're saying, yeah, so we have a catalog of all the different T codes which the bot has access to. And so then that's how I knew where to guide it in SAP. Did that answer kind of?
Yeah, you still, I think, have to know, if, for example, we're trying to pull, it's gonna go to a specific, really a table to
Yeah.
run a query. So you have to know how to get to that table,
Yeah.
right? But just as you would go into SAP and enter into the T code or whatever, and then navigate to the table, the bot knows how to do that. You're giving it in the variables, you're giving it exactly which screens to, when you type the numbers into those fields, you're giving it those numbers as those are variables, right? So when you build different programs, you change the variables. I want to go to a different screen. It already knows how to log in and start navigating, but you're giving it a different screen to go to. Does that make sense?
But to your point, it's the methodologies that they
It's
threw,
just tasks.
very,
Yeah, yeah.
detailed.
Each task.
So the GUI, the graphical user interface on RPAs is so good that you just click into this box and then it records, okay, I need to go to this SAP T code, blah, 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 with all the detail on it. And that's all happening behind the scenes, so you don't have to know it, right, like you
Okay.
asked. So, quick aside, is RPA is not new. I mean, it's been around at least since 1999. When I was in grad school, we were trying to program RPAs, but we could just basically use like a little matrix algebra in Excel because we had to know all that stuff. And to know all that stuff would take so long, if you miss one digit, it only blows up. It was just not practical to even use these things. Now, because the GUI is so good on these things, well, the big
API.
three- no, the graphical user interface. Right, well,
But
yeah, the API is underlying.
RPA is using an API.
Yeah, but the GUI, so what a person can actually do with this thing in terms of what Dan has been able to do, so Dan's a really smart guy, but he doesn't know what all these little 10 codes are, because Blue Prism handles all that for him in the background as he's just kind of clicking through. So that makes it super easy, or much easier than back in the day. That's why RPA is kind of hockey sticky right now. Makes sense?
So Chris, this looks like we're running a macro, like you report the macro and then, you run it, because, it knows all the steps to perform it. When you record it, you go through all these steps, so that's how it knows what to do and, how to do it, and then you just run it. That's how, how
It
I
is,
see
it is similar to a macro.
Similar.
The thing is that of course, this is operating across different applications.
Exactly,
Yeah.
so macro is only in Excel, this, works in, different systems.
Every application is on your desktop.
Um,
Any other questions? This is really good. Let's make sure we're all comfortable. Nice.
So we'll see it, so this is the raw this is like the transaction level, sorry, that moved really fast, but
Just ran to Excel.
it just, yeah, essentially what happened is I exported it to Excel and I saved it, and now the Excel is gonna pop up. And so this is the detail which I'm then going to import into Blue Prism to analyze.
So I dumped all that data from that SAP table into this Excel
Yep.
table.
So what I'm doing is I'm gonna import and analyze, and then I'm gonna do a couple different levels of aggregation. So to your point, the first thing I'm gonna do is a control total. So I'll show you.
Did we save it?
Yeah. Okay, so you'll see 3 different loops here. So this is a view of a sub-process, and I've slowed this down. Normally it runs at like light speed, you can't see what it's doing. What I'm first doing in this first loop is creating a control total, so I know that by each company code I have the total population of POs. The second loop over here is where I'm actually applying my logic. So what I'm doing is I'm looking for POs which are more than $15,000. So I guess it's when the invoice and the PO don't match by more than $15,000, and which are more than 30 days outstanding. Sorry, let me go back. And then what I'm doing here is I'm identifying all of those POs which are more than $15,000 and more than 90 days outstanding, and I'm creating a list of all my problem POs which I'm going to pass back to the main screen and do some further stuff on that. So this is what it looks like. It's so you can see like some of the shapes here, like this up here is a loop, so it's just looping through a collection. So any questions on that?
I have a question. When you sit down with somebody, you're gonna help create this for them. Where do you start? How does that conversation go? How do you pull out of them ability to think through task by task by task to get to this level of detail?
Well, first what I would do is ask them to like describe exactly what you want the bot to do and exactly what application it's going to use.
Okay.
I'll then have a really good idea. If they're saying, oh, I want it to go in Excel and move network files around and then send emails, I'm like, this is going to be easy, like easier.
Okay.
If they're saying, oh, I want to use this like a legacy system or some unknown application which I'm not familiar with, then I'm starting to think like, oh, let me get back to you, like let me have access to the application and then I'll get back to you. Once I've determined that Blue Prism can work with that application, then what I would do is ask for a detailed, like we call it click guides, but it's essentially a detailed step-by-step of everything the current user does.
Okay.
So
do you like it in Word or just like?
I just ask for
bullet points?
screenshots. I say screenshots,
Okay.
videos, written text. I don't really
Okay.
have a preference. Just any way that they can communicate. I want to actually see what they're doing, and then from there I would create the skeleton of exactly what steps the bot will
Like
need to do.
this, you mean like that kind of stuff?
The skeleton was the first screenshot we took, where all you saw was just
The high level.
the high level of like what it's going to do,
Okay.
and like those big decisions that it needs to make.
Okay.
And then you get into like the nitty, like this is like a sub process where it's just churning through data. So that's would be like my recommendation.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So now we've identified our population of problem POs. I'm just gonna let this. Good. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to determine the problem for each PO. So as we were talking before, in this scenario, there can be 3 different issues. There can be the person at the site received the goods, but AP hasn't posted the invoice. AP posted the invoice, but the person didn't say we received the goods, or they both posted, but they don't equal each other. And so what I'm doing is I'm assigning, like diagnosing what the problem is. And because at the end of the day, I want to create an email which has very detailed instructions on, oh, did I miss something? Okay. Yeah, so what I want to do is I want to create a detailed email that goes out to the site supervisor and the AP person that it tells them exactly what's wrong with each PO. So then I'm going to log back into SAP and take screenshots of the PO, which I'm going to attach to the email.
So when you made this, would you keep checking it, like in different, like you would check it, do the hyper monitoring at different points? Or would you go through the whole entire process and then start?
So I would go through the entire process and make sure, I would run it like, hundreds of times, just constantly churn through it to make sure I didn't have any errors, and then I would go live with it. And once I go live with it is when I would do the hyper monitoring.
Because at that point, you're pretty sure that it's gonna work, but you never know until you go live, right?
So you can see, it's basically looping through and inputting the PO number.
Yeah, unfortunately, the screen's a little bit cut off, so you see it's actually opening the PO screen, entering the PO number, and then it's opening, then it opens up that specific PO, then it's taking a picture of this PO.
And then it's saving that screenshot down on the network.
You can only save one at a time, right?
Correct.
Screenshot.
Yeah.
But yet it's repetitively doing it with different POs.
Oh, yeah, well, it's saving it and then moving on to the next one and taking another screenshot and saving it.
But it already like pasted the screenshot or saved it usually?
Yeah, it saved it.
Okay.
You're actually not seeing this at all because this is the one part where I had to write code for it.
But that's happening while
That's happening in,
right.
yeah. And so then the final step after we've gone through, identified all the problem POs, grabbed screenshots, is to send an email out, and so that, yeah.
So while you saved it, you told it, you gave it a name, like
Yeah.
the PO number,
Yep.
right?
You'll see in the final email that there's you'll see that I named it. And so this is the robot looping through and basically drafting an email is what you're seeing, and then you'll see the final product in pretty shortly.
It loops through a queue, right? So you've got a queue of all the records it's gonna work through. So it does this loop, goes to the next one, goes to the next one until it's done.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned you had to write some code.
Mm-hmm.
What language do you have to use?
Visual Basic. It's also compatible with C#, but I don't know how to do that, so I know some people do. But, okay, so this is do you have the actual, in the presentation, I think we have like a full view of the email.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Or I could open the email itself. Again, go back here. The actual email is such a nice feature. This is the text of the email. And here's a picture of the email.
Yeah. So you can see that it has, so it's got a JPEG for each one of the POs which we took screenshots of. It's got the raw detail which I downloaded out of SAP, and then it has, we also just attach, just because our site people don't like SAP, we do have like some general instructions on how to do things in SAP. And so then it's just saying, so this is a template that I created in Outlook, and these inputs here are all just variables, so all this stuff stays the same except for right here and here. And then that will get sent out to the correct people, which I took from the mapping table.
Yeah, because of space, it's hard to get everything on one screen, so it's waiting and so here's the actual text on the email, okay? So it puts the purchase orders in this column here, right? Purchase orders, that's actually entered. Well, this is all written in a script by the bot, right? The bot writes all this, creates a table, puts this text in, it puts the people down here, right? There's a change in the inspect the instant, and then it signs it as Bob. Bob is the name of the bot. So a couple other screenshots that, one thing, I don't know if we want to go through this, but this is a list of all the steps performed by the bot. So we kind of want to, we talked through this before, but this is all the different things that it's doing, okay? These like the steps it's performing. And then, here's some screenshots. Here's the bot main page, which you guys have already seen. This will, you guys need a copy of this. Here's the credentials, get the
Go
credentials.
back to present.
What's that?
Start presenting, yes.
Oh. And then, the login to SAP sub-process, so this is the actual, some screenshots of that. Terminate the applications, populate the queue. Here's the email, and then here's another shot of the email, okay? And then here's just a picture of the screenshots that you saw. Okay, so, before we go on, we just have a few slides left. You guys wanna talk a little more about that? Any more questions about that video we just saw?
Couple of questions,
Yeah.
thanks for the presentation, so, one, I'm just curious, because I've worked in the same type of process at other companies in terms of, the reliance on the accrual, SAP, I'm curious, could you just send a output table of problem POs instead of taking screenshots? I'm curious as to know why you did the screenshots, I'm assuming what I mentioned in terms of output table, like in Excel would be a lot easier.
Yeah, we did it just because of the resistance in my company to SAP, to be honest. They very rarely log into SAP, so we wanted to give them this detail has the vendor, it has how much the PO is for. This also has some details which they need, which will show the goods receipt and the invoices received. So before they go digging in SAP, we want to give them an overview of what they're going to be getting into, essentially. And a lot of times they know it, like right off the bat. It's just getting them into SAP, so it's more of a behavioral thing, to be honest.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, Renee, is this Excel attachment here.
Yeah.
That's all that information, but in an Excel format. So this is just different ways of presenting the same information. So that depending on, how that person likes to review it,
Yeah.
it's in the format that they can work with most easily.
Yeah, okay, and then the second question I had was, when you're pulling from SAP, I'm assuming your scope is limited in that I would expect to use some type of RPA tool like Prism or whatever, going up against PKTF and DSEC, for example, which are the main accounting tables in SAP. Those are typically with ETL tools, you can't query those without going on the exact company code, exact posting date range. So I'm curious, how can you, what's your data set size when you're using a bot? And how is that better or worse than an ETL tool like Informatica or SSIS?
Sorry, I actually don't know how, we can talk after.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I'm not entirely familiar with that, but yeah, I am curious to know what you're getting at.
Okay, sure.
But if we're in questions, how big of a data set can it work with? I think
Yeah.
it's really limited to whatever the, so in this case, it's pulling the data out of a table, putting it into Excel. So it's really limited by how much data Excel can handle in this case. But if you're gonna load into another, say some kind of a data analytic tool, right? It's really limited by what the capacity of that tool would be.
Probably what you wanna do, and I'm just guessing here, but you may wanna have a bot run your Informatica for you.
Right.
Okay, so this is one of the questions I had, so for the auditors, we're very familiar with ACL and IDEA, which are big database manipulation tools. And I sat down with the CAE a while ago and I said, well, what is this gonna do, and this is gonna replace this, like, no, you just have your bot run IDEA for you, or have your bot run ACL for you. That way you can crush these massive data sets and prepare all this up and have 100% audits, across the board, using, in seconds, right? And Jim and I have talked about that and more for our RPA with SOX later this year, but there's a risk in auditing 100% because if you audit past materiality to 100%, you start encountering all the errors that are buried in your material balances. So that's a whole new, you don't deal with that. So
Yeah,
anyway.
maybe you spend more years at it, but then when I've gone down the path of the 100% auditing, I find that we have so many exceptions that we spend a lot of time in a process. We have a lot of false exceptions too, so it's a learning process, right? You have to go through that, So just as a, kind of add on to this is, I thought I'd talk about, I think we've talked about a little bit already, but some other examples of RPA bots. I mean, just briefly, what bots are being used for at Eon, in addition to this PO thing, is Dan mentioned that one of the areas we found that they're spending a lot of time on through our business transformation efforts, when we did all the measurement, we had all up and we found that people were spending a ton of time on cash reconciliation. And part of the reason is because they had to go to so many different bank statements, so many different banks, and pull on all these different bank statements. It was very manual, very time consuming. People were spending literally 2 or 3 weeks on this, So built a bot to go and just go into the banks and load all the bank statements into a network drive. Other companies have taken it a step further, or they're taking that data and then they're loading it into their reconciliation tool and then using that tool then to do the reconciliation, and the bot can then run the tool and works through the typical exceptions. So just think about anything that the user is doing manually, the bot can be set up to do that as long as it's the same, it's consistent, done consistently. A couple other ones that, so a lot of companies have to manually update their FX rates every month, right? If they to go in from on date to or something, I think they should manually, obtain the information and load it in, so the bots can do that. The journal, you guys use it to load all the journal entries every month, right? So how does that work?
So we have a bot that will manually upload all of our journal entries into SAP. So the bot is constantly going in and checking its emails. So after a journal entry is approved, we have like a standard form which we use, and then after it gets sent for approval, it gets sent to the bot's email. The bot will log into SAP and upload an option. So that way, I don't know, it's just very SAP specific, but it's a pain to upload journal entries sometimes in SAP. So this one will just run like all night and upload our journal entries, and then it'll send a confirmation email to the original preparer, and then that way it does it that way. So.
We talked about the tax department forms, which you guys are doing, and also talked earlier about the data entry of the vendor invoices using a combination of OCR, AI, and RPA. One of the things that since Chris and I work a lot in the internal audit field and with SOX compliance, that kind of thing, and we think it's very interesting, is how can RPA be applied to the internal control testing and internal audit and SOX process, and to automate a lot of that. We're spending a lot of time thinking about that and working on pilots in that area. So we're going to have, I think that's in October, I think is that roundtable, just discussing how to use it within the SOX internal audit. So I'd be very interested to talk to you a little more and see how you guys are using other tools there, okay?
Hey Dan, what other, outside of finance, what other groups are using RPA or thinking about using RPA at Eon?
So what we're doing currently is trying to branch out to operations right now. And in the renewable industry, each wind turbine generates a tremendous amount of data, like real time, any alert or any error occurring at the wind farm generates basically just a log of what happened. And so what we're trying to do is import all that data and analyze it in Blue Prism, and then generate an error report for operations, because they do have a lot of reporting that we have to give out to our investors. So that would be the one big one which we're actually trying to focus on, because we want to make this, right now it is more of a finance thing, but we are trying to make it more of a like a company-wide thing. The other one, which we haven't even started yet, but which HR brought to our attention, was employee onboarding. So going in, creating usernames for new employees, and then basically making one big email that sends out like, here's your username and initial password to all of our different applications. So that would be one which we're kind of in the initial fact-finding stages.
He's got to look at it, like, that sounds like a security problem. Call security.
You mentioned that Informatica can be used on PLC course, right?
I believe so I don't know for sure.
Okay, is it possible other way around to we saw him, integrating, kicking off Excel jobs from the process? Can we have an informatic or an exercise like or some other data processing job from some other tool being kicked off from the phone or from the phone?
My answer is probably, and so the rule of thumb I use is that anything that a person can do on a computer, a bot can do on a computer. So if there's a decision point that you're like, okay, do I need to trigger this or not, you can build that, generally you can build that logic into the RPA as long as it's consistent. Right, so as long as things are consistent, you can use the RPA to do pretty much anything. But man, there's the slightest wiggle and a website gets updated, and Dan told us a